why don't they tell us how much they demand when they're extorting us, rather than have us have to guess, only to then wait 10 years to come back and throw us in a Spanish prison because we got the wrong number.
Patrick, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Awesome. I know that we're going to get into some heavy shit here, but I wanted to talk to you first about kind of like a callback to the last time I had you on a show about voluntarism in action. Are you still involved in that, and how are things going with that?
You're either talking about the Feed the Need, or you're talking about the steak cookouts for the homeless.
Yeah, it was either one of those, because I think we had talked about both of them in terms of I think the local organizations, or at least the local government, didn't necessarily want you helping other people.
The homeless situation has been very fluid over the past 3 years in Dallas. They kicked them all out from where they were living. They moved them around several times. They have a bi-weekly squad of cops and homeless helpers, or I forgot what they're called. It's some super Orwellian name. They're great guys that just go in and rip up their tents and steal their stuff and kick them off of public property that they don't own. So finding homeless people has been more difficult, and I think like most normies would be like, well, good, that's what we pay the government for, to get rid of all these, dangerous riffraff homeless people, whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, the main objection we have is that it's public property that's invalidly owned, and so they're just controlling people on property that they don't have a right to do so on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not answering your question very well.
No, that's right.
The state of the situation is changed because they're not all in one sort of concentrated area anymore. It's difficult to organize a large event where we bring a lot of resources to them because they're very spread out all over the place. The last time we attempted it, we turned it into like a caravan where we tried to drive around and drop stuff off for them. Didn't work as well. We're still looking for ideas for this year, but currently we're not sure what's going to happen. The stake for the homeless thing, the economics of the world has made it harder for people. That event depended on like our butcher giving us a really good rate on the stake, and it depended on a bunch of people having extra money to donate to a good cause. Both of those things are being challenged right now with with inflation making everyone poor by default, and so it's a challenge, is what I'm saying. It's harder every year to do good things. So that's kind of the state of things. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, what's crazy is basically hourly we're being inundated with gaslighting from people that are telling us that the economy is strong and resilient and all this other stuff. And unless you're in a select few areas where you're kind of insulated from that, I think the vast majority of people, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think the vast majority of people are really looking at the economy and they're like, look, this ain't working for me, right? Like it's like being on a hamster wheel.
I don't know anybody that would say things are going well. Everything, the prices of everything are going through the roof naturally, because that's what happens when you print record amounts of money. You've seen it's not even a hockey stick chart of the inflation, the money supply chart. It's just like it kind of goes this way and then it just straight up. And everything is becoming very difficult, and it's going to continue to get worse the longer these people are allowed to continue governing
with their intended existence. Well, so let me get into it then, because I think a lot of people, and I forget like if you even kind of put a label to you. I know you're part of Anarchist, so you would say that you're an anarchist. I don't know if you necessarily even get deeper than that. Not even that I think most people should, because I think there needs to be unity amongst people that identify the issues that are out there. But so anyway, I would say that I'm an agorist. So I prefer to displace myself from government oversight and centralized control as much as possible, right? And so one of the places that a lot of people would run would be to crypto, right? Like that would be what the assumption has always been. That's why crypto was started. That's what the main use case always has been, or at least what people think it always has been. And recently we get the case against Roger Ver, where he's now being held somewhere. I don't even know if anyone knows exactly where.
The same prison John McAfee, I always mess up his name.
Yeah.
The exact same prison John was suicided in, by the way.
Yeah. That is not without a gigantic ton of irony, right? Or maybe it's not even irony. It's probably intended. But so the case against him, I mean, like when it first came down, like what was your initial thought? I mean, like we don't have to talk through specifics, but what was your initial impression?
I had a chat several months ago with a guy named Mark Maresca, and it was about sort of black pill, white pill, and he's the white pill guy. He's got a podcast called The White Pill, I think, something related. And I was feeling very black pilled, and the show turned into like me sitting on his psychiatrist's couch and me telling him all about all these these black pills that I've been consuming, and him trying to teach me how to have a better perspective. That is still a fight that I'm still in the thick of. This is just another black pill. This is the state again continuing to get away with absolute tyranny, with absolute control, with abducting an innocent, peaceful person. One of the most productive, like an engine of the world, as Ayn Rand would say. This is one of the guys that has created businesses. He's created products. He's made the world a better place through his sweat and labor and investments. And that makes you the enemy of government, because the government is the enemy of the living. Now, let me try and do Mark proud by trying to get some perspective on that that would keep me from being completely black-pilled. Hold on, let me try. It's going to take a second. Okay, this is for you, Mark, if you see this. What that has done is it has continued to wake up a ton of people, especially in the cryptocurrency space, to the reality of their relationship to the government. If you are in cryptocurrency in any capacity beyond just like a dumb custodial exchange investor, you have the world's the world's largest threat to your privacy, security, and safety is now a threat to you. And a lot of people in the crypto space are coming to grips with that because they haven't really had to think about it in those terms before. And so hopefully that will continue to widen the awakening that we have.
Yeah, I mean, it could be complete coincidence, but I've seen enough, at least over the last 4 years, to think that there's no coincidence here, that this case is basically happening because of something that occurred back when Roger expatriated, right? Like he basically renounced his U.S. citizenship, gave it up, and he went to basically an island to be a citizen.
10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago, and filed paperwork, paid money, right? Left. He's been doing his thing abroad without his U.S. citizenship. And now all of a sudden we're, re-adjudicating shit that happened a decade ago, right? And there's a ton of huge question marks here. So, I mean, like, it's almost one of those things where it's like, I don't trust the justice system for a lick, right? Like, I don't think that, like, the word justice is the most ridiculous thing to include within that system. I mean, it's basically a punishment of, people that would dare exercise their own freedom, right? That kind of system. But from that standpoint, he just authors a book called Hijacking Bitcoin, where he essentially points out the multitude of ways in which this decentralized, what everyone thought was essentially an anonymous, custodianship kind of situation with Bitcoin, and how at every single point, at least in the midpoint of I would call it the distribution chain of Bitcoin, the government has worked to either coerce or directly centralize how things happen. And it's essentially destroyed everything that Bitcoin was originally intended to be. and now all of a sudden he owes an additional $48 million and he intentionally defrauded the government. I mean, am I reading too much into this, or does that like seem apparent to you as well?
I mean, I like to be careful with my conspiracy conjecture.
Yeah.
But it's pretty straightforward to see that the government finally realized that cryptocurrency is a threat, not only to their very foundation. It is an absolute threat to their entire power structure, their entire ability to control their population, their entire ability to wage war, all the things the Bitcoin people have been giving talks about for 12 years, however many. It's been, how old is Bitcoin now? 15?
Yeah, you're going on almost 15. Yep.
Yeah. The government realized. And so now they have to figure out how to work within the structure of the red herring that is their laws, legal system, and justice system to take out this threat without shattering the mirage that so many people have in front of them about what the government is and how it wields its power.
Yeah.
I don't think that's conjecture. I think that's pretty obvious and easily provable. It is, I mean, the guy's been out of the country for 10 years. Bitcoin's appreciated in value like 2 orders of magnitude since when he gave up his citizenship. I think, I could be wrong on the specific dollar value around when he left, but I think it was sub $1,000.
Yep.
Could have been a little over 1,000 when it happened, somewhere around in there. And he paid $3 million when he exited, and they had 10 years to tell him he was wrong. There's just so many obvious things. Like when I'm talking to a normie, it's almost hard to not just go 500 directions at once because of how many things that are wrong with this. Why don't they tell us how much they demand when they're extorting us, rather than have us have to guess, only to then wait 10 years to come back and throw us in a Spanish prison because we got the wrong number? How about you just tell us how much you're extorting us for? I'm getting mad now.
Well, no, if they tell you, then they can't come back to the well afterward, right?
Right.
Like,
right. So, it exposes the justice system as a complete farce. It's not enforced even a little bit equally amongst everyone. It's enforced when and where and how and to what degree they want it to be enforced.
Yeah.
And you cannot not notice that they waited 10 years. He drops a book exposing some stuff about Bitcoin potentially. And now he's in a Spanish prison right after the book. Why not a month ago?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Not to mention the fact that this is also something that I think a lot of people don't even spend very much time thinking about, right? But so give them the benefit of the doubt, because that's supposedly what our justice system is built off of, right? You're innocent until proven guilty. Okay. That's what they tell you anyway. It's like when when you're in prison and the guy's behind you spitting in your ear, telling you that you look nice. It's like, when you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, say you did do the math wrong, right? And he didn't even do the math. He's got an attorney. I think I also saw there was an accounting firm that audited the paperwork before it went in, right? All of these other people are involved in this process. And yet now they're essentially charging him with a criminal penalty. Actually, not just one, like a multitude, because then they add on all the rest of the BS that they normally add on. Wire fraud, mail fraud, all this other stuff that's associated with sending quote unquote fraudulent information via the mail, as if that's any additional of a negative thing or criminal act. And then, you're technically supposed to be looking at this from the standpoint of, okay, maybe he made a mistake. Just cut a check and you're done, right? Like, is that, do we really have to extradite him and go through this whole process? And it just makes it seem like this, amongst other things. I didn't even mention at the onset the Crypto 6 up in New Hampshire, right? Like, but I feel like there's a handful of people that have enough of a public presence where they feel like if they can nail them to the wall, that they'll get their point across, right? Like they won't have to do anything wide scale. They can just go after a handful of folks and be like, look, this is what you get if you try and take the end around route, and don't try it with anything else either, right? It doesn't just have to be Bitcoin, you know. Um,
It's really stupid to assume that the people in government are dumb. They're not. There's some wicked smart people there, and and what's worse is they think they're the heroes. They think they're the good guys protecting freedom and democracy.
Oh my God, I've had this conversation with so many people before. You're probably familiar with Sal the Agorist and a couple of the other people that are out there. I have this conversation all the time. I was like, those people are heroes in their own mind. Like, they don't think they're evil. They think they're saviors, right? Like, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
They go through life getting thanks for their service, and getting free donuts and coffee at McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. Like, they are the heroes, and society reinforces that, and it's not entirely their fault for thinking it, because they're surrounded by people that worship them and award them and give them medals, and so I also don't think it's conjecture, to your point, where the Crypto 6 or whatever in New Hampshire, there was a person, and Aaron talked about this on my show a couple days ago, where this government agent basically gave a list of names and says, we're getting indictments on these people, and if you don't help us, your name's going to get added to the list. They are absolutely targeting people. They're absolutely going and looking for reasons to prosecute, and thanks to this wonderfully just, fair, and balanced legal system, they can literally make anyone a criminal anytime they want. And that's just the state that we live in. And if you're anywhere in the world these days, there's very few places where that's not the case. That is the state of affairs. It's sort of just that's the risk we accept as part of being alive at this point. There's nothing we can do. The government will prosecute anyone they want, and they will get a guilty verdict on just about anyone they want for whatever reason. And not only that, but you've seen the travesties of justice in the other crypto spaces against the businesses, where they've had the SEC go after people. They killed Library, which was one of the internet's best chances at media freedom ever to have been created. We finally had an uncensorable free speech related platform. Couldn't have that. Couldn't have that. All those people that bought the Library tokens of their own free will because they valued them. Oh, no. The SEC had to protect you because you're dumb and you don't know what you're doing, and you got tricked into buying those tokens. And Library pre-mined, God forbid. Like, no one's consent was violated. No one's upset at Library about anything. Everybody's happy Library exists and that they own tokens. And the SEC's got to save us from ourselves, because that's what we are. I say this on Twitter like twice, 3 times a year, but it's just the truest thing. Like, if there's one idea I could jam into everyone's brains in the entire world, it's that you are not protected by these people. That's the lie they tell you. You are controlled tax livestock on a plantation. You are being farmed. They take care of you only to the degree that you still go to work and pay your taxes. And beyond that, stay in your lane, stay in your pen, and if you step out of line, they're just going to put you down. If you cause problems, they're going to put you down.
Oh yeah, it's the mob with more steps. Right? It's the mafia with more steps, right?
with a clown nose on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of that interview was absolutely fantastic. Well, I mean, it's kind of a black pill interview, but that interview with Aaron Day was absolutely fantastic. And I would recommend anyone who doesn't follow or subscribe to Anarchist, specifically on Odyssey, go watch on Odyssey, because I think there was a large portion of that you actually had to censor out from YouTube, which I thought was extremely funny. Is that you singing in the censorship song?
No, that is one of the original producers on my original YouTube channel, who is he's a successful audio video tech company guy. And he's also just a wizard at music theory. And so I wrote the script, me and an AI, Grok actually on Twitter. Me and Grok wrote the script, and I shot it to Kason, that was his name, and I was like, "Hey man, can you write a little ditty and maybe perform this for me?" And he's like, "Sure." And in like less than an hour, he whipped that out. And
it's freaking hilarious, because just in the middle of the video, because I was watching on YouTube, like Guilty as Charged, and in the middle, you just have like this comedy break where y'all are still talking, but it's just the funniest tagline. So anyone who doesn't follow,
do what you gotta do.
Anyone who doesn't follow Anarchist, definitely go check out that interview, because it's incredible. And in fact, you interviewed Roger like literally what, like a month or two ago?
3 weeks.
Okay, yeah, like I mean less than a month ago. That episode's also still up, as long as at least YouTube will allow it to be up there. But I do know it's up on Odyssey.
March
So
30. Yeah. Okay.
March 3rd. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you kind of like the downstream. And in fact, I don't even know, we don't necessarily even have to get into it. My first thought when I heard about this was, and some of the particulars was, this is kind of like the worst nightmare of anyone who's been paying attention to Biden talking about taxing paper profits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is literally the worst manifestation of that. You paid, and then all of a sudden they're going to go back 10 years ago and re-legislate what you should have paid and what the actual price was, and whether you paid enough tax or whatever, right? But so from that standpoint, there is an attack. It's obviously not just happenstance; it's coordinated. Where do we go, right? Like I'm a gold and silver guy, okay, and so gold and silver has some amount of usage, but in a digital world, obviously, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I think you've transitioned a while back when you figured out what the failings of Bitcoin, or at least kind of the outmoding of Bitcoin when that was happening. You transitioned to Bitcoin Cash, right?
No, I mean,
okay.
I don't talk about that which I've lost in boating accidents very much.
Oh, no, fair enough.
But if I have any, it would have been whatever my bag in BTC was when the split happened.
Okay.
I mean, we can talk about this about to whatever degree you'd like, but I am a fan of Monero,
okay.
and the way I see it, I might as well use PayPal if it's not private, because merely having sovereignty and the ability to move money, as we can see in real time right now, is completely insufficient in a world where the government can and will use the wrench on you to confiscate whatever they want. I think I forgot. I just saw a report today saying the government, the U.S. government owns more Bitcoin than anyone else, or some insane thing like that. And they acquired every bit of it by confiscating it.
Yeah.
From people. Yeah. At the point of a justice system gun. If you don't have privacy, then you might as well use PayPal. And I'll defend that, and I'll die on that hill. If you think I'm wrong, I'm happy to. Like, I used to think, okay, yeah, it's important that you own, you have custody of the wallet, you have the key, no one can move your money or freeze your account or garnish. What do they call it when they just take money out of a bank account?
Yeah, like garnish or requisition your wages. Yeah.
They can't just confiscate your Bitcoin. No, but you can rot in a cage until you give it to them. So
yeah.
It's the same thing. If it's not private, if it's not secret, then I'm going to use PayPal.
Yeah. It's I definitely know a lot of people who have, to put it in a delicate way, they've transitioned their support to Monero. I think a number of other people have also. A lot of people are both Monero people and Pirate Chain people, and so I guess that's just kind of like diversifying. Where you're kind of like putting your eggs, so to speak. But I don't know. Like it definitely seemed like a black pill when I was listening to the interview with Aaron and some of this recent stuff, because even if that is the case, right? I think the biggest issue with anonymity in crypto has always been the on-ramp and the off-ramp, right? And so at any point in time, if you have to convert from fiat to crypto or crypto to fiat, right? Like that's the most vulnerable in terms of, even with Monero and Pirate Chain, because the moment that you have to get back into the normie system or out of the normie system, they at least have some kind of transactional record, that happens there. And so that's still something that it's like, I mean, at the very least, I know that unless there's some kind of RFID chip in it, that I can show up at my local coin shop and, trade paper currency for bullion and then take that wherever I want, with the exception of it being confiscated at some imaginary borderline. And then at least it's portable and I don't necessarily have to worry about it. But once again, once you get into the system and dealing with people, so it's almost like each one of these cryptos almost has to kind of create its own ecosystem that you stay within which unfortunately isn't exactly also the nature of crypto, right? I mean, like, crypto is supposed to be decentralized. It's supposed to be easy for you to translate back and forth and exchange whatever you want for whatever you want, right? I mean, do you read it that way? Is it something where we're just destined to find ourselves into some kind of centralized hellhole?
It is. I mean, this is a super wide and deep topic, and we can talk about it as much as you'd like in whatever depth you'd like.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places you can go with that. I see a huge failure mode of decentralized cryptocurrencies in that they're not. There's no hierarchy behind their development. I don't know if you I don't know if you saw my interview with. Let me look it up. Guy Swan. I spoke with Guy Swan recently, and who's a maxi. And I laid out, I think, so I'm a technologist. I'm a technology entrepreneur. I've been a coder my entire life. I've started multiple successful companies where we've created software products that we've sold and marketed. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to establish myself as somebody that has been in the space and knows what failure and knows what success looks like when it comes to software development.
Don't worry, I won't equate that with you waving around your liberal arts degree from Brown. It's all right.
I did not go to college.
You're better off for it.
I know. I quit high school 2 years early to start coding. I got my first job. The things that make a software project successful are almost completely won and lost in funding and leadership. Funding is obvious. That makes sense, and that's not an issue for cryptocurrency. Leadership is a huge issue. When there's no central authority, when there's no visionary that knows what they want to see in their product and that can drive that vision, knocking down every barrier in their way to bring that vision to market. If you don't have that, or if you have a weak vision, or if you have sometimes even like a board of directors that are too hands-on with the vision is enough to kill a successful product and company. You have to have a good vision driven by somebody that knows how to motivate a team behind it to get stuff done, well funded by a team of people that knows how to manage a company. And all cryptocurrencies, not all, but most cryptocurrencies are run by anonymous people that only exist as a public key signing commits on a GitHub. And there's no one cracking a whip. There's no one saying, this is the vision. And like I said in my recent interview, there's no one saying, this is the feature we're going to release. We're going to release it in 1 month. And so get to work, developers. And a month comes and goes and this feature isn't in production. Somebody's getting fired, and I'm going to hire somebody that can be more competent at their job to make my vision a reality, because this is what the market needs. And this is what we have to be successful. None of that vision is there. None of that leadership is there. None of that market pressure is felt directly by any specific group of people. It's all communal, shared responsibility, shared consensus decision-making, shared vision, which leaves you with all of the tragedies of the commons and all of the problems that communes, like actual communistic communes, fail because of, which is constant division, infighting, lack of leadership, personal attacks are rampant. All the stuff you see in communes happened to Bitcoin, happened to these cryptocurrencies. The most successful cryptocurrencies are the ones that are led by a small team that is opinionated. That's the software. Like in software development, if a project is opinionated, it means there's a guy in charge that has a vision and he's going to do it. And if the people collaborating on the GitHub project don't like it, fuck them. This is what I want, and we're going to create this. The projects that have that actually become successful. And that's capitalism. That's the free market. That's how we organize ourselves into successful structures that create for the world. And that's an intractable problem for a lot of cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. Like you can't just, you're never, I mean, you're not obviously going to be able to put a team in charge of Bitcoin to push it forward. Now that was like one little root of about a 1,000 that I could have gone from
Yeah.
your prompt. So if you wanted to go in a different direction, just say so. And
No, that's perfect. I mean, obviously, there's also kind of like the doomer end of that, where if you don't have that, then the government and the powers that be are more than happy to step in and be that, right? And that typically means that they'll crash it, right? Like unless it serves some kind of purpose for them, you know. I would actually, before we even go down that kind of like black flag kind of alley, in your mind, like what kind of projects out there have had that kind of figurehead? Like, do any of them come to mind in terms of ones that seem successful, at least here at the beginning? I mean, what's crazy about Bitcoin is you have a bunch of people that are looked at as like influential or figureheads, but like you said, they're not driving the direction or the philosophy of Bitcoin, right? I mean, I liken it more to a cult without a leader, right? Like there's just, especially within the maxi space, it's like a lot of them revert to this either very philosophical standpoint, or there's also this intent desire for like Schadenfreude. Like they want to see the billionaires become paupers, and they want to become the billionaires, right? Because that's just the only just way that this system could resolve itself, which is funny because it's just like the French Revolution all over again, right? Like it's, we don't like those rich people. We want to be the rich people, or we want those rich people, But I mean, like, are there any projects that really kind of come to mind that have had that leadership role? I mean, maybe Ethereum, but even that has its issues.
yeah, there's a very clear example. First of all, before I forget, I want to mention the iron law of oligarchy, which it produces the effects I'm talking about in communes and in these decentralized, leaderless, hierarchy-less cryptocurrency projects or software development projects. It basically states that in the absence of leadership, leaders will arise. And they will arise in suboptimal ways often. So it'll be whoever's most charismatic, whoever appears or puts on the aesthetic of intelligence the best, whoever puts on the best show, whoever's most influential or persuasive, or whoever actually works the most, or maybe puts in the most hours. There's all sorts of ways humans tend to sort of defer their authority to other people around these ways in situations where there is no hierarchy. That's called the iron law of oligarchy, and that's exactly what's happening in Bitcoin. It's not leaderless, but there are no leaders. So who's the leaders? Well, it's the people that are influential. And how are those people that are influential chosen? Well, it's a complex matrix of bullshit things that should never be part of the decision for why they're in leadership positions.
Yeah.
Who runs the best YouTube channel? Who has the most clout on Twitter? Who gives the best debate talks at events? Like, none of this has anything to do with producing a good vision for a technology product.
Yeah.
Now, the best example of an open source project that is led effectively is Linux. It is ran by one guy, and anybody can submit code, and if he doesn't like it, he will call your mother names and make you feel bad. Not only he won't just reject your code, he will insult you for it, and the operating system is being run effectively and successfully because of it. It is the crowning example of a successful open source, collaboratively developed project. It's also centralized. It's well funded by a group of private corporations for the most part, and it's led by one individual with a team of people that report to him directly. He has a vision. He implements that vision.
That's interesting, because a lot of the people in the crypto space, without doing that, even that kind of like thought experiment, will just give the pre-programmed response that like, oh no, we need to decentralize, right? Like everything needs to be decentralized. But I think when most people say decentralized, I think what they mean is they want to decentralize away from a central point of authority that uses force, right? Like there's a difference between the power to hire and fire, or say yes and no, or the power that can literally throw you in a cage for the rest of your life, right? And I really think that necessarily has to be refined within that space, because there are a number of projects out there that just seem to be fantastic ideas, right? But at the end of the day, without someone saying that, like, this is kind of, at least philosophically, the path that we're headed in, the chickens just run around in all different directions, and they just do whatever they think is best at the time, right? And you almost never get anywhere with it. There's a couple actually that I've been looking at. I actually just installed, I don't know if you've ever heard of SoarChain, but I just installed a SoarChain miner in my car, and so it's a way of monetizing your driving data. And Soar Robotics is the company that basically founded that blockchain. Now, it's obviously not the most decentralized or open project, because it has that team that's essentially stewarding the project along, and then trying to build these collaborations with these outside private entities that will then use that data and reward the users that are generating the data, right? But without that team, who knows where that would go, right? I mean, there's a lot of design that has to go into it. There's a physical device, there's an app build, there's the follow through in terms of the database on the back end that then has to be licensed somehow to other entities. I mean, to think that would spontaneously occur is very naive. I mean, it would be it would be literally a miracle, right? Like, I can't imagine that happening in that way. But so from that standpoint, I mean, like, is Elon like the guy? Like, who's gonna be the guy that creates the, like, truly anonymous crypto that, essentially is the biggest middle finger to the centralized, at least, authority figures that would throw you in a cage? Like, I don't know.
Wow, there's like 100 ways I could take this conversation right now. How spicy do you want your hot takes?
Well, I'm famous for saying revolutions start with ideas, but ultimately they need guns to protect the ideas. So
there. Okay, so I'll put it at medium spice. There are people that take good concepts and then they fetishize them, and what I mean by that is they take them too far, and that's happened a lot in anarchist spaces, crypto anarchist spaces, with open source software, with decentralization. All of these concepts are good to a degree. They have a specific use case they're very efficacious at solving for.
Yeah.
But when they go too far, the cracks show and they fall apart. I'm putting together a video on all of the problems with open source software. Closed source software has a lot of advantages over open source, and me even saying that will make some people hate me, because they're religious about it. But it just means they haven't thought about the downsides to open source software. That's just one example.
Well, it's also the same problem that say, like, socialists and communists have. They're all anti-capitalist because they think capitalism is the problem. They don't connect the dots that the real problem is the monopoly on violence that's held by the government, that then can cause actual fascism to happen, right? Like, without that, you don't get fascism. You just get a bunch of corporations, right? Like, but I'm sorry, like, keep going.
Well, okay, so one of the major problems with open source software is that people trust it by default, by virtue of the fact that it's open source. Well, it's open source, so other people have looked at it, therefore it's safe, right? I can trust it. Fucking bullshit. A very, very single-digit percentage of open source projects have been competently reviewed, and it's probably less. It's probably around 1%. If you don't have competent review, it's worse than closed source software, because closed source software is generally produced by a person that's liable for what the software does. Either they're liable actually legally, or they're liable in the marketplace, where if they put out bad software or damaging software or stuff with vulnerabilities, they're going to go out of business. They're liable, they're responsible. Open source software, no one has liability, and most of it's never reviewed competently by any kind of neutral source. Perfect example is that browser. Somebody forked the Chromium browser like a year ago. I think I did a show on this actually. And it was supposed to be the new, fastest, most privacy-respecting Chromium-based browser out there. Kick the shit out of Brave, kick the shit out of, whatever.
Yeah.
And it turns out that he literally put furry porn on hundreds of thousands of people's computer. Liberty-loving people, like us liberty lovers, we just, new open source privacy software, fastest browser ever. Hell yeah, sign me up, download that shit. You all got furry porn on your computer. Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that story.
No, I don't.
It's the quintessential example. Just because it's open source doesn't mean it's trustworthy. In fact, it should be less trustworthy by default until it's been reviewed, because not only has it not been reviewed, and so it could contain all this bad stuff like furry porn and security vulnerabilities and maybe even malicious attacks, but it could also, you're handing your source code to every hacker out there. Yeah. What's harder for a hacker to what's the word I'm looking for, to exploit?
Yeah.
Open source or closed source software. Obviously, if the hacker has the source code for the software, he can exploit that easier than if he has to go through a very complex, high knowledge process of disassembling machine code.
Right.
Without getting into the details. Anyway, okay, rant over on open source software. Same kind of thing with this decentralization thing. There is decentralization of trust, which is where cryptocurrency got its superpower from.
Yeah.
Decentralized trust, not necessarily from decentralized software development, not necessarily decentralized node adminning, and not necessarily decentralized anything else. The superpower is decentralized trust. You don't have to trust any single institution because we have this model that decentralizes trust.
Yep.
Now, people took that word decentralization, got a boner. I don't know if we can talk like this on your show. Forgive me if we can't.
This is a free speech friendly zone. Go for it.
and they just said decentralize everything. And if it's open source and decentralized, it is the best. It is the future. It's where we're headed, and that's how it needs to be.
Yeah.
Here we are. Here we are. Rudgevers in a Spanish prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got to be careful. You got to be careful and realistic, and not enough people in open source and have you heard of anybody speaking out against open source? I never have. So I'm because people need to balance their perspectives on this stuff. Same thing for cryptocurrency. Now, I'm not saying that we need to know the first name and addresses of a team of people running a cryptocurrency. They could be anonymous, as long as there was a hierarchy in place and there was a visionary there that was actually driven and got rid of bad developers when they weren't producing and made his software happen as if it took it seriously, like we have to in the market. That's what you need to look for in any project, not even just software, in any project, in any company. That's how you're successful.
Yeah. Well, I think to your earlier question, I think a lot of people assume things are decentralized when they aren't, right? So, for instance, the open source nature of Linux. I think most people truly think that Linux is just the epitome of open source, right? Like there's no centralization. It's all kind of like, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like, leadership by committee, right? Like I think it's a misnomer. And so a lot of people will point to these things that they've had a lot of faith in, and they've used a word for a long time being open source, and it really doesn't mean exactly what it means, right? Like, or what they think it means, very Princess Bride kind of situation. But I would agree with you that I think a lot of people out there they latch on to a concept or a guru. And this is something I talk about like in our other show that I do Sunday night. And we talk a lot about like spirituality. We talk a lot about kind of like emotional and spiritual balance and, personal health and that kind of thing. I think especially over the last 4 years, but it seems to just be kind of hardwired a little bit into human psyche. I think when people get shaken, like from their belief system or, like a lot of things over the last 4 years that people assume to be true have been shown to be complete bullshit. Right. And so when that happens, they almost kind of like wander listlessly, like trying to find the next thing that's going to give them direction and safety and definiteness. Right. I I think open source and decentralization as concepts can be one of those things. It can be one of those very intoxicating ideas that we can just kind of all live together in this open source kind of world, and no one's ever superior to anyone else, air quotes superior, right? Which, I mean, we see this kind of like pendulum effect all the time. I mean, when you talk to Bitcoiners, the one thing that they talk about is, well, there'll only be 21 million Bitcoin and scarcity, and that's the important thing. And I ask them, well, is it really important for a currency to only have a set amount all the time? Can it inflate or deflate based off of some known constant relationship with what underlies it? Oh, no, there's only one Bitcoin and we fixed it and all this other stuff. And it's like, they're reading the scripture of Bitcoin like in a literalist fashion, right? And that is the truth, and that is the way, right? And it's worrying too, because from my standpoint, it's not rich sons of bitches that are going to be hurt when Bitcoin does eventually go to where it's going, right? It's poor people that staked their life savings because they're desperate, because like you said, inflation's high. They have to look to try and make up the stagger somehow. So they're basically buying a lottery ticket, expecting that they're going to, retire in 2 years.
I need to look this up because I think it would be fascinating. I want to get a price chart of BTC's price controlled for inflation. I wonder if the US dollar hadn't been just flagrantly being whored out. That I wonder what BTC's actual price is.
Well, so I'll there's a lot of people that like to price things in gold, and I've seen a couple of Bitcoin versus gold charts. I haven't seen it specifically in terms of like inflation adjusted, like, the real Bitcoin price or whatever. I'm sure it's out there. The one thing I will say is I do think a lot of people mistake the price action that we've had over the last couple of years 100% on monetary printing, which there's a piece of it that's due to monetary printing. And then there's also the bullwhip effect that related to the lockdowns and the supply chain disruption. Right. And so the one argument I keep trying to make to people is that they essentially pre-bailed out a lot of entities that they knew were going to have problems as soon as they locked everything down. And so a lot of companies are sitting on a ridiculous amount of cash. But the problem that they've had through the 90s and into today is they can't unleash the cash. Like, there's literally a talk by, I think it was Waller was the one Fed commissioner who was talking about it. And I think he gave this speech like back in 2014 or whatever. And he was essentially talking about how, try as they might, they couldn't cause enough inflation, right? But the problem that they had wasn't that they weren't printing enough money. They were obviously printing a ridiculous amount of money. It was that the velocity of that cash in the system, there was like all these black holes that were just sucking up the cash, and like it literally couldn't get unleashed in the system. And so what they've been trying to find, and also I did an episode on this, and it's like a tinfoil hat episode. In 2018, they tried to put their foot on the brake and raise interest rates. And if you remember what happened in 2018, 2019, we almost had another great financial crisis then, had they not reversed course. And now all of a sudden in 2020, we get lockdowns and that crisis and stuff, and they have a blank check to write as much as they want, right? I'm actually worried that the wave of liquidity that's going to cause the actual inflation hasn't hit yet, because we haven't gotten to the point where it's actually advantageous to like unleash all of this cash in the system. And so we're going to see how they respond to this next iteration of, I think we're actually going into a dollar shortage in the short term, but then in the medium term, that's when you'll see that wave of real liquidity hit.
Man, I wish I was an economist.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
No, that's okay. I mean,
I do code and I do moral philosophy. Outside of that, I'm kind of a noob.
But no, I mean, like you're completely right. Like, money printing causes inflation, right? The question becomes, what does that equation looks like, right? Does it happen tomorrow, next week, like 6 months from now, that kind of thing, right? It's one of the reasons why I'm a big believer in gold and silver, is because while they're not perfect inflation hedges, like they are hedges, right? And at the same time, you get all the good stuff, right? Custodianship, and it's somewhat liquid still because there's still a system of coin shops and dealers you can go to, and some people will still trade in it. But yeah, I would love to see that that inflation adjusted Bitcoin chart. Or even if you look at the gold one, like, it becomes painfully obvious that it's not. I actually, the one thing I did do, I don't know if you've ever looked at this or anyone's brought this up. If you juxtapose Bitcoin over the top of, say, like the NASDAQ or the semiconductor index, it's like almost identical.
Really? Oh.
Yes. Yeah. And so when people were like, oh, the ETF, we've arrived, there's going to be all this new money coming into Bitcoin, I was like, they just turned you into a NASDAQ stock. Like, that's what you are, right? I mean, if Satoshi's still alive, he's rolling over, if he isn't alive, he's rolling over in his grave, right? Like, if he isn't alive, then he's rolling his eyes, right? Like, but again, it's one of those things where it's like people repeat something enough times, it becomes truth,
There's a book called, here's another digression for you, but there's a book called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
I think it was it's been like 10 years since I've read it. So I'm going to get some of the details wrong, but generally it's about like an ex-government operative, maybe CIA, not sure on the specific agency, but he would be sent into other countries to undermine their economy. And he would do it by organizing super cheap central bank loans that the country will be able to build out all kinds of infrastructure immediately, getting all their politicians, accolades, indebting their country to the central banks, and then the central banks rug pull the country and throw them into debt, and they have to debase their currency to pay off the debt, something like that. And so that's like layer one of the cake. Layer two of the cake is why they're doing it. Why they're doing it is much more insidious and led me to think about an economic theory that I'll get into, but it's basically, if the world's superpowers, monetary powers, can make sure everyone is inflating their currency in lockstep with each other, then inflation can go on indefinitely.
Right. Yeah.
There will never be a crash. All it takes, though, is for one country or one currency to actually be responsible and to not inflate itself, or to go on a gold standard, for example.
Right.
If one world currency does that, then the whole system collapses, because then you have an actual fixed value currency, and it instantly exposes all the countries' inflation. But as long as everybody keeps inflating and keeps destroying their currency at relatively the same rate, then they can keep doing it forever, and just everybody gets poorer, but it doesn't really matter because everybody's being poorer. It's only the sort of the relative buying power that matters. And so I had Walter Block on my show years ago, and I pitched this to him, and he said I was completely wrong and that it was dumb. And I couldn't understand why he was saying I was wrong, but people can go watch that. But it makes sense. Read the book. It's interesting. It's an interesting book about the behind the scenes of the government keeping everybody else down.
Yeah. It's I've actually been almost kind of like looking into the crystal ball. And so obviously a lot of people watch the Federal Reserve for, at the very least, signaling, right, within the economy. You already have the European Central Bank saying they're going to cut in June, right? So the U.S. can't be far behind because of the dynamic that you just laid out, right? Regardless of whether long-term it's a good idea, just in the near term, the strength in the dollar would cause a ton of economic turmoil in the United States if Europe's cutting and England is cutting and the U.S. isn't, right? And so from that standpoint, we're getting rate cuts sooner rather than later. The question becomes whether or not that actually results in positive economic growth or not. I don't know if you saw recently with the most recent drop of the deficit spending from the U.S. government and all of that borrowed money, the GDP growth was like, we got $1 of GDP growth for every $4 of borrowed federal money. And it's like, it also, when you, they also been talking about the strong jobs market, right? When you look at all the jobs market, the jobs that have been created, it works out to something like an average wage of $100,000 a year for each job that's been created. And everyone who just got a job was like, what the fuck? I didn't get $100,000 a year, right? Like they're getting 40, right?
Yeah, I think effective wages, like spending power from wages, has been going down. Like,
oh yeah,
for the last
most
10 years.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was also like, what was your come to Jesus moment? Like, I forget if I asked you this, but like in terms of your philosophical shift, maybe not necessarily government wise, or maybe it's intertwined there, but I mean like politics wise, but like monetarily, from a standpoint of personal finance and whatnot, like, did you have like a moment where like you were woke up and you were like, holy crap, this is all like a rigged system and I need to find some kind of alternative?
Financially speaking?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
just
Or
ideologically?
I mean, it could also be intertwined with the political piece because they just go hand in hand nowadays.
Well, I mean, back when I was a Republican, I saw that the government was destroying the country financially. I mean, I think most Republicans would agree with that even today, maybe even more so than they ever were before today.
Yeah. Were you like a Tea Party guy?
Yes.
Okay.
I was in Glenn Beck's studio audience multiple times. You can go see me in the audience on his show back in the day. I was a Fox News watching Republican, never really like a conservative, like culturally, but sort of fiscally and in other regards, I was a Republican. Yeah. I was an idiot. Yeah, let's talk about how dumb I was.
No. Do you still have some of those kind of like connections? I mean, I would imagine in your personal life, you have people that are of different persuasions, but
sure.
I would say what's really super interesting is, so there was just a comment made by Trump about how he's going to be a champion of crypto or whatever, which we all know that, like, words coming out of a politician's mouth are, they're not worth anything, right? I don't even think he knows what crypto is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But from that standpoint, there is kind of a shift happening. And I see crypto as one of those things that can be a unifier. But again, the government's crackdown is essentially, once again, trying to draw a line. So, like, for instance, the first article I read about Rogers' arrest mentioned his prior case where he had been selling basically a firecracker on eBay, right? And so I think the story was like he had been brought up on charges for selling this firecracker, which was essentially an agricultural product, right?
Okay.
And then they tried to allude to the fact that he was selling explosives on eBay, right? And the moment I saw that, I was like, holy shit, they are trying to, and this wasn't like a small news outlet. I mean, this was like, CNBC or something like that. They're obviously trying to undermine his character, right? This could be something that could be a unifying thing across political boundaries because it's money, it's your way of life, right? But once again, I think they're trying to like drive that stake between people on these ideological levels.
I don't think unification is possible anymore.
We've gone too far.
I think the government is too powerful, and I think the government's power is inversely proportionate to people's ability to unify with people that are not like-minded.
Okay.
Inherently. So, for example, if me and you lived next door to each other, and there was no state involved, and all of our associations between us, maybe we had contracts for how we were going to handle the easements to access our properties between us. I had no control over what you did on your property as long as it didn't interfere with mine, and vice versa.
Yep.
I had no power over you, vice versa. We could probably, even if we were very different people and you were culturally conservative and I was culturally promiscuous and liked, I don't know, having a femboy harem party at my house every week or something. And we could coexist because we could be like, man, I don't understand how he lives. I kind of think it's bad. He's probably going to have bad outcomes, and that's sad. But, I have no say over his life. And so we can coexist. And, maybe in between my femboy harem parties, you could come over and we could hang out and have a beer on the porch and talk talk about the state of affairs, and
Sure.
we could be friends.
Mhm.
Because there's no power over each other that we can wield over each other. Now, introduce a state.
Mhm.
You start with like a night watchman state, this magical minarchy thing that was actually a tumor that metastasized.
Mhm.
But you start with minimal powers and voting. Now, you and I once a year go to war with each other in the ballot box.
Yep.
Now, and as the government's power grows, the weapons in that war and the scope of that war and the territory consumed by that war grows. Now the government is so powerful. It's involved in literally every aspect of all of our lives. Like, name an aspect of your life that the government doesn't affect in some way. I dare you. It's a challenge. I bet you can't. I'm serious.
No, I know.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. So as government power has consumed everything has become political. And
Yep.
once a year or multiple times a year, when we go to the ballot box, we're pointing government guns at our neighbors. How can you be friends with somebody that's pointing guns at you? You can't. There is no unification. You're not my friend. You're my enemy, not because we couldn't be friends, but because there's this power structure out there that we have to point at each other. Yep. Otherwise, because if we don't point the guns, our neighbor's going to point them at us. And that's this, the game theory works out to where it's an untractable problem.
Yeah.
You can't resolve that. The only way you can resolve that is to get rid of the power. The closest thing that we can come to it is like when we get anarchists that don't wield that power and can work together. And I'm talking to an agorist, so I'm definitely preaching to the choir now, right? Like if you can associate with people on terms outside of that government power, then we can return to the state of normalcy where we can both just be humans. Maybe I think you're weird. Maybe you think I'm weird. But we can coexist, and we can even be friends, and we can have fun and be prosperous together.
Yeah.
I talked about that a lot. That was an epiphany I had when I went to Anarchist a couple of years back. Anarchist is I'm sort of like a businessman. I am sort of driven and productive, and I wake up and I get shit done all day, and then I go to sleep. I handle my business.
Yep.
I don't use intoxicants that much because it impairs my mind, and I really need my mind to be productive. So I enjoy being clear-headed and thinking about my work and whatever.
Yep.
So that's just who I am. That's what I love. I go to an Anarchist, and it's a lot of sort of like hippie types or crunchy granola types, and everybody's high there, and it's just not. It's not me. It's not my thing.
Yeah.
But like, I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that those people exist, and I can appreciate that those lifestyles make those people happy.
Yep.
And because we're not pointing guns at each other at Anarchist, there was like this feeling of, holy shit, I can coexist with these people and be friends with them because they're not trying to control me, and I'm not trying to control them. And I can be like, dude, if you're high all the time, you're probably not going to get very far in life. But hey, do you?
Yeah,
and
so it's you.
It's your life, man. That's powerful. So that's something that can unify us, getting people to work outside of the state.
Yeah. To your point and what we talked about earlier, it is difficult too, though, because when you are trying to organize, right, and you're trying to do something, not necessarily political, but say something, talk about voluntary action or charity or something. You definitely have to be, you have to be cognizant, right, of who you're working with, right? Like, which, I mean, is just a generally good practice, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's business or, activism or charity or whatnot. Like, you should know who you're working with and what their skill set is and what their propensity is. But I think, it's such a small population that it also makes it a little difficult because there are some people that are highly motivated that are, they're doers, right? Like they just knock it out of the park. You give them something to do, or even if they're leading, they're going to knock it out of the park. And then there's other people that are just kind of like, they're the like hippy dippy types that are just like, woo, like, if it's meant to be, it'll happen, you know, like that kind of thing. And you're like, well, unfortunately, the evil people don't have that mentality, right? They're very motivated and they're very effective at doing things.
Some of them. I mean, there's a white pill in here that I can uncover for you. Like,
Sure.
The government's terrible. It's terrible. It's inefficient. And it's in large part because it's infested with lazy welfare whores.
Mm-hmm.
Like most government employees are there for the paycheck and the pension.
Yep.
And they will do whatever the bare minimum is to make sure that they keep that paycheck getting signed and that pension paid out when they retire.
Yep.
And that's it. And that is like 95% plus of all government employees.
Oh, yeah.
And like, imagine if the government was actually run like a business. It would be a full-on tyranny. So it's like there's a white pill in that the government is by its very nature going to be a lazy, inefficient, mostly do nothing. It's like a magnifying glass in ants, and we're the ants, of course. And if the most of the time the magnifying glass is just kind of not really focused. It's lazy. It doesn't really do much. In fact, it's hard to get it to do anything productive. And that's the white pill. But every once in a while, when this massive this rich, powerful magnifying glass needs to get something done, it has the ability to point at something and focus on one thing and burn that thing to a crisp. And it will do that, and it will succeed because the U.S. government is one of the most powerful forces to ever exist on the planet.
Yep.
It's just getting that magnifying glass pointed at something is slow and inefficient and tiresome.
Yeah.
That's why now we're back to the decentralization thing as a superpower. If a million people are running nodes, the government can only point that magnifying glass at a few nodes at a time, and it'll take a while for it to have an effect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is white pills. Like, the government's far from perfect, and it has tons of weaknesses, and it's full of a bunch of retarded welfare whores.
You're not wrong. I spent a good portion of my life working with clients that are, just that. I mean, they're more so on the local level. So the power that they wield is symbolic at best, right? But you're right. Every so often, if you give them an excuse to, right, if you kick the hornet's nest, they then wield the full power of what they can do against you. And so when they team up on you, you have no recourse, right? Like, they will find a way to, destroy you, essentially.
It's the motivation factor. So
yeah.
in a private corporation or in a group of friends, when you guys decide to accomplish something, you're motivated either by profit or competition or the thrill of the challenge of engineering a product or the desire for your friends to have a great beer and pizza night watching the game, whatever. Yep. You're motivated by something, and so you get it done.
Yep.
And if you fail, you're punished and responsible in some way. That usually doesn't exist in government agencies. And I can say this, I wrote code for the FAA back when I was a statist for years, and I saw the inside of these institutions and also the Air Force for a limited amount of time. But when the motivation that's usually there in private corporations and groups can spring up inside of a government agency in the form of like if they're all told that the Branch Davidians are abusing children in the compound, well, now just like as humans, suddenly all the people in the ATF are really motivated to save those kids because they're the heroes, right? Let's not burn it down.
By burning down the building with the kids in it. Yeah. But at least they're not being abused anymore.
But they get shit done when they want to. And like I said, like, there's 5% that are really wicked smart people that are actually motivated just to be good at what they do. And those people exist in government institutions too. And so it's not a not threat. It is a threat. It's just a really random shitty threat.
Well, I don't know if you've heard the phrase, but we used to call politics beauty pageant for ugly people, right? And so all you have to be is the least ugly, and usually they elect you king, right? Like your grand poobah.
I mean, when I ran for not governor, I was definitely not the prettiest, so that's probably why I lost.
All right, I've kept you for an hour. I know you're a popular dude. You got a lot of shit to do.
I'm good.
Where can where can people find more information about whether it be Anarchist or anything else that you're working on?
I mean, Anarchist is the podcast name. Anarchist.com is the website. We're still converting it from my old channel that we used to have, where we did a lot of like nerdy philosophy stuff, called Disenthrall. Anarchist is sort of evolving. I kind of tried to do the Jeff Berwick thing for a couple of years and only do sort of interviews with some of the same types of personalities that he had on for years. And I realized that I was a shitty Jeff Berwick, and I needed to do what I do best, which is nerdy philosophy and debates and interviews with people that I was interested in talking to. And so we kind of reinvented the channel, I guess January of this year, and we've just been doing it, and it's been working out. Like, we've been losing the subscriber count has been a churn. Like, people were there for Jeff, they're walking away, and new people are finding the channel, and it's good. So Anarchist.com.